Unfound is a podcast that will be 3 years old in August of this year. It has an interview-based format and concentrates on the facts, not the theories. Today, and for the second time, I will take you back to the beginning, then right up to the present as I cover new updates on many of Unfound's cases. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. As many of you already know, 2018 was a tough year for me. I lost both the woman who conceived me, Suzanne Joyce, and my mother, Loretta Densel. In addition, Judy Carastori, who is the mother of 3 of my best friends, their brothers, died. And she had a great influence on me as well. A tough year. But going through those experiences certainly can teach a person some lessons, if the person is willing to learn them. If you're so caught up in your own ego, your pride, your vanity, then even things such as death of loved ones can have no effect in bringing about positive change in a person's life. Well, for me, I've started to think about what I am leaving behind. Because in all of these women's cases, there's not a person in the world who could have objectively griped about any of them. They left behind nothing but good. Their deaths were the opposite of what Shakespeare wrote, that the evil that humans do lives after them. Their good is oft interred with their bones. So, with that theme of what we leave behind and doing this update episode, I want to remind all of you that Unfound will never be about getting on some chart or getting some award, going to CrimeCon and all that stuff. Unfound will always be about affecting the people's lives who appear on this program. And I will never apologize for being a vigorous advocate for all of them. This is what Unfound will leave behind. But don't get me wrong, it's going to be here for a long time. And now a summary of Unfound. No, you will not find this on my friend Megan Good's website, charlieproject.org. Unfound was born out of the idea that the public should know as much as it can about missing persons cases. I, as the host, go about getting you all the facts I can by interviewing those people who are closest to the case, usually family members. However, we've also had bloggers, reporters, and private investigators on the program, but only one official law enforcement member, Detective Kenneth Maines. Why only one? Frankly, because cops, although they know a lot, they never want to tell you anything. And unlike many programs that splice in the host's questions and comments after, Unfound plays every interview as it was recorded, minus the mistakes. The interviews are played in this manner because I believe you, the listeners, need to be reassured that nothing is taken out of context and that you are listening to a conversation like any two people might have. The first call I ever made representing myself as the host of Unfound was to Mary Lyle, mother of Suzanne Lyle. The call happened sometime in late July 2016. I was at my parents' place in Pennsylvania. I can remember standing in their bedroom with the door shut for privacy when I made the call. That's a true story. She surely had no idea who I was, and at that point I had no history of ever interviewing anybody. I can kind of rely on my extensive resume now. But at the time, I was just a guy on the other end of the phone line. I was very nervous. However, Mary couldn't have been friendlier. And I would say these days we talk about once every 2 months. And she has been very supportive of Unfound, I can't even begin to tell you, sending several future guests my way. I hope to meet her in person sometime soon. That conversation was followed by a call to Patrick Marker, the guest for the Joshua Guimond episode, then Tim Wright for the Ben Charles Padilla episode. And before I knew it, Unfound had gained some momentum. Probably the next big thing that happened for Unfound that pushed it forward was a listener kind of becoming my right-hand woman to find guests for the program. Emily, you've heard me mention her many times before, is responsible for finding probably half the guests you've heard on Unfound since May of 2017. Her passion and compassion make her excellent at what she does. She stays in contact with guests even after they've been on the program. Then, in December 2017, Unfound became linked with the Tribune-Review in Pittsburgh. It carried Unfound on its website throughout 2018, and I helped them cover older missing persons cases in Western Pennsylvania through monthly articles. Along the way, Unfound also picked up Cherie Biggs, business manager and overseer of both the Unfound live show on YouTube on Wednesday nights and the newest creation, the Unfound Think Tank on Patreon on Sunday nights. There have been books and newsletters and t-shirts and poll questions, and most importantly, the respect all of you continue to show the guests who are members in the Unfound podcast discussion group on Facebook. Thank you. Like the first update episode that came out in the summer of 2018, I'll be doing all the talking today. I'm Ed Dentzel. I'm from Leechburg, Pennsylvania. I attended Grove City College, class of 93. I had all sorts of odd jobs, including magic show stage manager, printer and fax machine technician, Department of Transportation flag person, model, and Star Trek actor. I lived in Las Vegas from 1998 to 2011, and I live in Madeira Beach, Florida right now, although I will soon be moving to Clearwater Beach. But Vegas is still my favorite city. Unfound news. If there could ever be a sign of how much Unfound has grown, it's the number of people who have come forward to transcribe interviews. When I made the first request back in mid-2017, I got like 6 or 7 people. Now, by my last count, over 30 people have contacted me. I cannot thank these people enough. Transcribing is not for everybody. If you're interested, there is pay and perks included. Next, speaking of transcribing, Volume 5 of Season 1 would have been done by now, but I had some things pop up with interviews I had planned for this week. It's also the reason this is an update episode and not one with a missing persons case. I had to scramble a bit, but I will be proofreading Volume 5 this weekend, and then it will be available on Amazon. Finally, I've been told this past YouTube live show on April 3rd was a bit echoey. Cherie and I will be trying to figure out the issue this weekend. I also contacted Wirecast to see if they could offer up any reason that it happened this week and not the past ones. Thanks. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. This week I need to thank Kayla and Miranda. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. Merchandise, the books at Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Do not forget the reviews. Shirts at myshopify.com. Cards at makeplayingcards.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. Before I start going through all of these updates, I want to assure everyone that just because I am mentioning a certain case does not mean I believe Unfound has something to do with the new information. If I believe that to be a fact for a certain case, I will say so. Also, Unfound does not scoop or plagiarize other people's work. So in some of these cases, there's work being done. I know what the work is. I know the progress being made. But I will allow the people who are actually doing the work to reveal their new information when they are good and ready. So let's get this started. We're going to start at the beginning, and we have about 36 cases to cover. Yes, really. And I just have notes on each of them typed out here on the screen. And I'm going to have to rely on a little bit of my improv skills to put it all together. I do not have a script typed up because that would have taken weeks probably. Let's start at the beginning. Suzanne Lyle. There's probably more going on in this case than has been going on since the 1990s. I think there's more going on in the case now than any time in the 2000s. I got to speak, coincidentally, to Mary, her mother, about 3 weeks ago, and I cannot tell you how excited she is that there are people, young people, taking an interest in Suzanne's case, because that case is now over 21 years old. And so there are young people at the College of St. Rose in the state of New York who, as part of a project, have started going through all of the files regarding Suzanne's case. And so a lot of these kids weren't even born when Suzanne disappeared. And here they are taking an interest in her disappearance. It really makes Mary feel good. And from what she's told me, they're making some progress. I'm not saying that, charges are imminent or anything like that, but from what Mary told me, they certainly have found some new information that I don't think has been out there to this point. Certainly was not in the interview I did with Mary back in August of 2016, was not covered in the Disappeared episode, which was done, I think, at least a couple years before I interviewed Mary. So they're making some progress. I really don't know how much I can say. I do know, though, that there is a podcast called Upstate Unsolved that started back on March 2nd of 2019 that is covering some of what these students and professors are doing. So I would say go there. I'm going to guess that it is in the iTunes Store, on Stitcher, and other places. I have not listened to it. As many of you know, I really don't have time to listen to other true crime podcasts or TV programs because of the work I do for Unfound. But if you want to hear more about what's going on with these College of St. Rose students and some progress they're making, I think it would be best to find that podcast. But I can just tell you, Mary is very excited that of what's going on. I will tell you this. There was nothing that I heard in talking to Mary that would say that they are turning their attention away from Suzanne's boyfriend and his family. Let's just put it that way. I don't know if going through everything that any new suspects have popped up. I don't know that. All I know is they haven't ruled out Suzanne's boyfriend at the time and his family, maybe at least knowing about what happened to Suzanne back in March of 1998. The next case we'll cover is Kelly Rothwell's. David Perry is back in jail. In fact, this is a fairly recent development within the last, month. I would urge all of you to go to the TampaBayCrimeReport.com, where my friend Lee Clifton writes all about Kelly's disappearance. Of course, she was the guest for that episode. Once again, it seems like yesterday. It's going to be 3 years in October. It's hard to believe. But he is back in jail. He is back in jail because of a criminal trespass. In fact, 37 charges of criminal trespass. Now, how do you get that many criminal trespass charges? Well, he lied about his identity to move in with a woman. And then she figured out who he was. And as part of his stipulations for being out of jail, I guess he's not allowed to do something like that. I think everybody else who doesn't have a criminal record, maybe lie to somebody about their name. I mean, I guess there's eventually consequences. But for him, that means he goes back to jail. And I think those 37 times were the amount of times that he was actually at her house. I think that's how it worked out. I can't help but laugh about it. It's very serious because I am under the belief that he did murder Kelly Rothwell, and of course Lee believes that too. But I really believe that number 37 is the times that he went to this woman's house. And so he lied to get inside because if she knew who he really was, she wouldn't have allowed him inside. So he's back in jail, and I don't know if he's going to get out again. And I talked to Lee about it a little bit, but she is surely the expert on that case. And once again, Tampa Bay TampaBayCrimeReport.com is her site, and she's had a couple recent blogs regarding all of this. The next one, Donnie Smatlack. Not any new information to my knowledge, but I was very happy during my work with the Tribune Review in Pittsburgh in 2018 that we were able to cover his case again. I forget what month that was that it came out. It was one of the later months. I'm going to guess maybe October, September, October of 2018. I was very happy to get that done, and I really don't know if it was able to move the ball forward any for this case, but I just felt good that it could get some coverage again by TribLive.com because it hadn't been covered by the Trib in quite a while. So Donnie's parents were interviewed for that episode, and I continue to believe that his disappearance is connected to the drug world that he was involved in, and even possibly his girlfriend at the time being like an accessory, maybe after the fact, for his disappearance. That's all really I could say about that case, but the update is that I'm just happy that since I did the last update, we were able to get some new local coverage in Western Pennsylvania for his case. Next, Christopher Hyde. Back in, I'm thinking it was October, maybe September, October of 2018, Lila, who is Christopher's sister, of course, she was also the guest for that episode. That was, I think, the last episode of 2016, the first year of Unfound. This is the first chance Lila had to come to Florida and kind of do some poking around, handing out some flyers. I saw a picture that she posted wearing her Unfound shirt with Christopher's picture on the back. I think that she got to talk to the police while she was down here, but I will be honest, it's been, about 6 months since then. She has not given me any updates. She is not required to do so. I would, of course, love to hear about anything that went on, but I am not going to badger my former guests and, to tell me updates because I'm doing an update show. If they want me to know things, I'm sure they will tell me. So she came down here. I think that she was here for a week. And I don't know, once again, what exactly came out of it. But to my knowledge, that was the first time she came to Florida specifically to look into Christopher's case in quite a while. I'm not saying she never did it since he disappeared back in the early 2000s, but I don't think she's done it very often. So she was down here. I saw some pictures, but I do not know what the results of all of it was. The next case on this update list is Jeff Nichols. I'm very happy to see his name on this list because my impression is that not a lot has gone on with this case since virtually when it happened. A couple months ago, a person from the Utah Cold Case Coalition contacted me, and they were in touch with a reporter with the big Salt Lake City newspaper. Reporter there was looking to do a story on Jeff's disappearance, which I was very happy to hear. So I was able to put them in touch with Jeff's sister, who was the guest for Unfound way back at the beginning of 2017. And she got together with this reporter, and I think that an article about Jeff came out in that newspaper and on their website, of course. And I think that's the first time any publication in all of Utah or anywhere else, maybe except for Unfound, has covered Jeff's case. So I was happy to kind of facilitate that in my own small way. Don't know if anything has come out of it yet, but we're always hoping. And you never know, and I'll be talking about this on a later case, you never know when just the coverage of a case like that locally can get the police engaged. So I'm hoping, and I even know since then that I've gotten, I think we went maybe 2 years without me ever being contacted by anyone regarding Jeff's case. And I know that some people saw that article because they contacted me just with some new ideas and things like that. So that's what happened in Jeff Nichols' case just within the last couple months. And I'm glad that the Utah Cold Case Coalition knows about Jeff and is trying to get that case solved. The next case, Peggy and Patty McDaniel. This is a case that continues to simmer, would be a good word for it. It was as cold could be when Unfound came along. It was through Mary Lau that I got to meet Joyce Rivatuso, who I think is, of any guest that has been on the program, I probably talked to her the most, and that's great. That's great for me. It's great to have Joyce in my life. But it quickly became hot, and it was really thanks to a listener who really was moved by Joyce's story when she was on Unfound. I'm going to say April 2017. A listener really took it upon herself to get this case out there, and because of that, this case continues once again to be simmering. Just like you're letting some water boil or something like that. It's continuing to move along. I don't know if they've been actually down to speak to Marvin Warren. Of course, Ed Gross, the other guy who was with Peggy and Patty McDaniel, we believe at the time they disappeared, he is deceased for a few years now, but Marvin Warren is still alive. And I don't know if the cops have talked to him, but let's just put it this way. All of the police officers, investigators who should be responsible for Peggy and Patty McDaniel's disappearance now know who Joyce is, and Joyce knows who they are, and they take her calls and they keep her informed, which for a case that's 40 years old now, it will be in September, I think, 79, I believe it was, that is certainly saying something. And I could not be happier about it. It's. I hope that they get some results soon, but most importantly, people are working on it. The next case, Brandy Wells. This is a case that I would say my assistant Emily has become very, very personally involved in. In fact, when Emily started working with me for the program, I think she started in May of 2017, and I think this is one of the first cases that she brought to me to be covered. I think that's the way it happened. That's how I remember it. And she has continued to talk to Brandy's mother, Ellen, and she's gotten to talk to some of Brandy's friends, ex-boyfriend, or was it ex-husband? I forget now. But I really, she and I have had a lot of conversations. Emily and I have had quite a few about this case. I really don't know how much I can say about it, but Emily continues to keep tabs on it. I will be honest with you, though, in my opinion, that there hasn't been anything that I've heard, as many discussions that Emily and I've had, that turns me away from the idea that the guy that you see in the white hat in the video that is so obviously with Brandy when she leaves that country bar, he still continues to be the best suspect. I'm under the impression that Brandy's mother thinks otherwise, and that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. Because Brandy's phone did end up in the hands of somebody else who had a criminal record, and some of the people around this person also had criminal records. But my choice is still the guy in the white hat. But this is a case that Emily continues to keep me updated upon. It's just that with the conversations she and I have had, and I just don't know how much of it should be made public at this time. Also, just a few months ago, they tried to link Brandy's disappearance to some remains that were found not far from Longview, Texas. And they did not end up being Brandy's. And I think that the way I remember it is that um, it was fairly obvious to anybody maybe who knew Brandy's case fairly well that the remains were not hers, but they at least checked it. And in my recollection, it ended up being a girl that had been missing from Florida, coincidentally, where I live. So Brandy's name was in the news for a little bit because of that, but she was not the remains. The next update, Ashley Eifert. It's really, this is going to be a longer entry in all of these cases that I'm covering because there's actually quite a bit to talk about. I'm very happy to say so. It's interesting how things work out sometimes. This would have been back when I was still in Pennsylvania for this couple months after my mother died, and I was starting to finally get some time to work on Volume 5, and Volume 5 is almost done. I'm actually proofreading it right now. But Ashley's case is in Volume 5, and I was looking at the case once again to just kind of refresh my memory as to what I was going to write about in the observations section for this chapter. And just kind of out of nowhere, I just decided to contact her mother, Yvonne, who I'm not saying that we've been totally out of touch or anything, but I hadn't talked to her in a while. So this probably would have been back in January. And we started talking, and if I can say, she was maybe just feeling a little down, as every person, every guest that's been on Unfound feels, because their case isn't solved. And it just kind of maybe gave her some suggestions. And in the meantime, and so she took them, and that was really good. In addition to that, in talking to Emily about this case, having told her that I talked to Yvonne, Emily started trying to run down this prominent person in this disappearance, and her name was Nicole Johnson. To refresh your memory, I'm not going to go through all of the facts, but Ashley went over to Nicole Johnson's house because Nicole had some baby furniture that she was going to sell to Ashley. And allegedly what happened was that Ashley was on the phone, we presume, with her, the father of her child, Joe, and she was yelling at whoever was on the phone, and then she tried to leave, went out to her car. It allegedly wouldn't start, so she walked down the street, and that was the last time anybody ever saw her. Well, this Nicole Johnson has seemed like a little bit of a ghost, and I was thinking with Emily, let's try to find, because my search abilities and Emily's search abilities have gotten a lot better since we started working together in May of 2017. Well, Emily was able to track down the correct Nicole Johnson. You can imagine how hard that would be, being that there are many in the United States. And we were able to facilitate a conversation between Yvonne and Nicole. And they hadn't spoken since around the time that Ashley disappeared. So we were really happy to do that. But what we also found out is this particular Nicole Johnson, who does not live in Louisiana anymore, has a criminal record. And Yvonne, that certainly caught Yvonne's attention, and she passed that information along to the police who were responsible for Ashley's disappearance. So at the time that we did that interview, I did the interview with Yvonne way back in 2017. Once again, May. It was right after Brandy Wells' case, because Brandy is also in Volume 5 that's coming out. Nicole Johnson was once again a little bit of a ghost, the woman who was like on the scene for a little bit, and then she disappeared, and Yvonne never got to talk to her again. Well, now, Yvonne knows exactly where she is. She got to talk to her and even knows a lot more about her. But I'm not going to give you any more information than that because I know where Nicole is. She certainly doesn't need harassed or anything like that. This is something that the police need to look into. But just once again, just from me putting together Volume 5, it really caused me to say, you know what, maybe I need to talk to Yvonne again. And we kind of got this thing started again. And just with a couple phone calls and some time put in, the case was moved forward just a little bit. And we'll see where it goes. But being that Nicole Johnson, it seems, has had some problems since Ashley disappeared, obviously is going to get anybody's attention. I don't know if she has anything to do with the disappearance or not. My opinion is the next step that needs to be done is whether there can be any connection made between Nicole and the father of Ashley's unborn child, of course, who also disappeared with her because she was pregnant at the time. Something else that came out of me talking to Yvonne and her going over to the neighborhood where Nicole Johnson used to live and where Ashley allegedly disappeared is that she discovered that the address that I think was on the official records for this case had been incorrect. And I think it's now fixed. In fact, I can tell you that having done some Google Street viewing between back in 2017 when I covered this case and then just recently again, the addresses were certainly different. The neighborhoods were certainly different, kind of in the same area, but not the same street. So just once again and going over this again and talking to Yvonne and her doing just a few things, she was able to determine that the address that had been on a lot of official documents for this disappearance were not correct. And who knows what problems that has caused over the last so many years that Ashley has been missing. The next case, Brandon Williams. I was able to get ASOC, which of course is headed up by Detective Ken Maines, was able to get them to be interested in looking at Brandon's disappearance. And the way that works is I told Stormy about what she needed to do. And what needed to happen was that the police department in Nashville, which is now responsible for Brandon's disappearance because the best information we have is that he disappeared in that city, although I'm thinking more and more that is up for questioning. But the police department there was very happy to send the file to ASOC so Kenneth Maines and the rest of his group could look at Brandon's case, see if there's anything they could do, offer up opinions, anything like that. I was very, very happy that they offered to do that for Brandon's family. The bad part is that they issued the report and sent it back to Stormy eventually, and it just feels, and I don't mean to be negative, it just kind of feels to me that this case is a little bit of a dead end right now. It's just very cold at this point. This phone number that allegedly Brandon used to call his boyfriend in Key West has not been able to be traced. It's just been too long, and this isn't even, of course, that long ago that Brandon disappeared. But the key, I think, is still this phone number, but I don't know where to go with it now. I've looked into it. I found out the person that had it at the time, but he had left that office years before that. And this phone number in this office might have sat dormant for a long time. And then I got to talk to a woman, a lawyer who worked in the same office, and she couldn't really explain it either, how that number would have been used to call this guy in Key West. And now the number is part of some, if you ever get like scam likely calls on your cell phone, I think it's like one of those numbers now. So it lost, how do I want to put this? It's not affiliated with that residence or that office, that building, that location in Nashville, Tennessee anymore. And that's what makes it so difficult. So I just don't know. And once again, I'm not trying to be negative, but having put a lot of time in my spare time into this case myself, it's hard to tell where to go with it. And this is why I've begun to think that maybe Nashville is not the key. Because here's what I look at. I look at what has really come out, I think, in seeing the report, seeing ASOC's report, and I was very fortunate that Stormy allowed me to read it. What really came into focus for me is that Brandon had I forget what the split was. It was $100 from one person, $50 from the other. Well, he was going to be in Key West in Nashville within the next 24 hours. Why did he need $150? That continues to run through my mind in this case. And I'm not sure where to make it. Now, we know that Brandon did have some drug issues and things, my perception is that he was asking one person for money without the other person knowing he was asking for money, and vice versa. So it seemed like he was trying to get money off multiple people without the multiple people knowing it. That's my impression. So it very well could be that he vanished in Nashville, Tennessee, but I'm as open to the idea now that he actually did get on the bus and maybe made it to the next stop, which is supposed to be Atlanta. I think that we have to start opening our minds up to that. Either that, or use that $150 to get on a bus and go somewhere totally different, which I'm also open to. But that is where the case stands at this time. The next update is for Craig Freer. I went back and looked at the first episode I did, the first update episode that I did last July. I think it was July of 2018. And Craig was included in that. And at the time, I told you about a private investigator that was looking into it. And I even have in my notes at the time, not sure what happened with that. Well, now I do know what happened with that, and I really can't talk about it. I'm not going to get into this guy's personal life. But, and I'm not going to say his name. So, he and I had a recent conversation, just wonder what's going on. And I had a tough 2018, he had a tough 2018 too. But he has told me that he's going to be back working at it soon. And I look forward to seeing what can be found. I don't think that I'm speaking out of school when I say, because I know I had this conversation with many of you after Craig's case, even before I knew that this private investigator was going to be looking into Craig's case last year, is that Craig's father continues to be a person of interest. Now, he has passed away. I forget when it happened, but I don't know if I talked about that in the last update or not, but he has passed away. But he is a person of interest, and the reason is this, because if you'll remember, once again, not going to go through all the facts, but he went over to the apartment complex where Craig was essentially hiding out from work. And Craig was there with a young woman who finally admitted that he was there. Well, allegedly, Craig's dad went over there, and seemingly, they never ran into each other, seemingly, allegedly. And Craig's car was in the parking lot, and it sat there. And the belief possibly is that he saw his father there and he kind of sneaked out some other way, and then something happened. He ran off, whatever. But I think the opinions have changed now. Because even if you go back and listen to the episode where I interview Craig's mother, she didn't want to talk too much about Craig's dad. And I think this is once again with my experience that if I could go back and do that interview differently, I probably would have asked a few more questions regarding that. Once again, with experience, I think at the time I'd only interviewed maybe 30 people at that point with Craig Freer's case, maybe not even that. Now it's 120. So, but I think the father continues to be a person of interest. I know I just recently I had somebody contact me about questions regarding Craig's case. So people, they go back, they find Unfound for the first time, they go back, start listening to the older episodes, and this is once in a while why I get questions, cases that haven't been covered for a while. And, a lot of things about the phone call Craig received, and some of those things have gotten sorted out, but I can just tell you that this private investigator got involved at the beginning of last year and then had to take some time off. He's told me that he's going to get back into it. I mean, we'll see, but my instincts tell me that the main person of interest, once this private investigator gets back involved, is going to continue to be with Craig's father, who, once again, unfortunately is not with us anymore. The next case I want to cover is Chip Campbell. Now, the weird thing about this is going to sound like a Groundhog Day, and that this update is going to sound a lot like the update I did for his case last summer. But it's a totally new story. If you'll remember that when Unfound covered that case in June or July of 2017, his roommate at the time, Tanya, who we believe, he believed she was his girlfriend, but it was obvious now that Tanya was just pretending to be the girlfriend of any guy that was in her orbit, who could get drugs and everything else. So I think there's the belief that she was leading Chip on, and that may be one of the reasons that he went missing. Well, she went missing, I guess you could say. She fled the jurisdiction of Florida, and it was a couple months later, I think it was in August of 2017 or September, that she was found and brought back to Florida. Well, my state isn't the greatest at learning its lessons, and she ended up getting out of jail somehow, and she went on the run again. That's true. And she luckily was found again. Just, I think, maybe 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, something like that. And we're pretty sure this time, and I haven't talked to Chip's sister Lisa about it too much, and I wouldn't be able to say anything that she would tell me in confidence anyway, but I wouldn't be able to say anything that she told me in confidence, but at least my belief is that she's going to have a hard time getting out of jail this time on bail or bond or whatever. And the hope is that, being that all of her outs, her lucky chances maybe left out, are all used up, that maybe she will now start to talk a little bit more about Chip's disappearance. That's the hope. Because hopefully my state can learn its lesson. That you can't let this woman out of jail. You can't let her out with house arrest with one of those ankle bracelets, anything like that. She is going to run if she has the chance. The next case, and it's a unique case for Unfound. Back in July of 2017, I had Jeff Wise on the program to talk about the disappearance of Flight 370. And little did I know that, I don't know if I could have suspected at the time that the plane still wouldn't be found almost 2 years later. I don't know. Probably it's a huge mystery. But what's interesting about me doing this update episode is that just recently I happened to be featured on Jeff Wise's website, jeffwise.net, where I got to talk a little bit about my stage managing of magic shows experience and how that compares to Flight 370's disappearance. Now, the reason that was relevant was because Jeff has a new book out within the last month called The Taking of Flight 370, and I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I say that he believes that the plane was hijacked, not kind of the traditional way we think of it, but also technologically hijacked. And in his book, he talks about comparing that, what was done to a magic show. And so what happened was I emailed him and I said, it's funny you brought up some of these magic analogies in your book because I used to be a stage manager for a magic show in Las Vegas, and he wanted to hear more about that. So I wrote him back, and that email became the post that you can now find on jeffwise.net. Jeff Wise's theories, probably, if you can believe it, they were very controversial at the time in 2017, because my recollection is that when I interviewed him, the searches were going on, and there was a strong, strong belief that the jet was down there in the southern Indian Ocean. It's just a matter of time. Well, here we are in April of 2019, found nothing. And there is even evidence, if you read Jeff's book, to believe even those parts of flaperon and some other things that have been found over on the western side of the Indian Ocean, like Eastern Africa. There's reason to believe that even those parts are contrived, that somebody actually went and put those parts out there, and that they did not drift from the southern Indian Ocean from the crash site of Flight 370. And it's science, not some kook science, but scientific method going through analyzing these pieces. So my impression is a lot more people believe Jeff now than they did back when he was on Unfound in July of 2017. And he's been a guy who since almost day one has said, you're not going to find that jet in the southern Indian Ocean. And as an aviation expert, and that's what he is, you can find him on Mayday and a whole host of other programs about aviation. He's one of the few aviation experts that said that back then, and he continues to be right. And I'm happy to know him. I'm happy that I could assist with at least one entry on his website, and I would recommend you get his book, The Taking of Flight 370. That's what's going on with that case right now. The next case I'm going to cover is Jennifer Wilkerson's. Now, I have to tell you, probably the biggest thing that has come out of covering her case for me personally and for Unfound is that I've made a very good friend out of course, Jennifer's mother, Vicky. But there was a woman who I was introduced to very early on in covering her case, in covering Jennifer's case, who assisted Vicky back at the time up there in Lubbock, Texas, over there in Lubbock, Texas. And this woman continues to this day to be a confidant of mine in Texas. She is in law enforcement in Texas. I talk to her once in a while. I'm going to say maybe once in a month. And we talk about issues that I run into. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? I'll be honest that I've talked to her about, of course, the Thomas Brown case. I've talked to her about cases that aren't even in the state of Texas. But she has been so helpful. Of course, cannot use her name. But she's been so helpful. And even on some cases that I'm working, like what you might call deep background cases that are very long-term projects for me, I will bounce ideas off of her. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And it's been really good because I don't have that experience, and she does. And I know once in a while she tunes in for the YouTube live show. And I know a couple months ago she sent me a message afterwards telling me how great I did. So we have a very good relationship. And I know her because of the Jennifer Wilkerson case. So if you ever hear me talk about my Texas law enforcement confidant, that's who it is. This was a confidant that came on long before, for example, the Thomas Brown case. I think I've been pretty open about some of the people I've gotten to know in that case, whereas this woman, I've preferred to just keep her anonymous, and I think that's the way she prefers it anyway. Now, what can I say about the case itself? I went back and looked to see what I said about Jennifer's case last summer, and things, I don't know if they're really moving forward, but if it is true what now myself and my confidant and law enforcement and some other people believe happened in Jennifer's case, it's going to be a very, very big deal. It's almost a little shocking, and even the way that we were able to even find out about this is a little surprising. I wish I could say more, but I know that this is something that's being looked into right now. And now that I've thought through it, now that I've talked to my confidant about it, obviously Jennifer's mother knows about it. It makes so much sense given everything that went on that it almost has to be true. But once again, it's easy for me to talk. I'm a reporter. It's the police who have to prove it. But it could be a very, very big deal if what we think happened to Jennifer and who did it is actually true. The next case I want to talk about is Kent Jacobs. Now, I have to be honest, I really don't know how much I'm allowed to say about this case. I can tell you that I talked to Dennis Mahan, what was it, about a month ago? He called me regarding that there certainly are some updates regarding Kent's case. However, I've been looking around on Dennis's Facebook pages and the websites that he manages, and there hasn't been anything posted on any of them. So I'm going to withhold saying what he told me, but let's just say that there are considerable things going on in Kent Jacobs' case, and it's certainly good news because this is another case where I know Dennis felt that he'd kind of hit a brick wall on it. If we'll remember, you will remember that there was a rumor that Kent was buried in a refrigerator on a certain person's property. And part of the property, my understanding, had been searched, but not the entire property. And this particular refrigerator that's allegedly in the ground was never found. And there's a good chance now, I think, that maybe some searches are going to start again. It's really all I can say. I'd love to say more, but once again, I don't want to scoop anybody, and I get a little worried when my guest has told me things, but he hasn't posted those facts on his own website or Facebook page. So I'm sure you can understand why I'm a little hesitant regarding that. But this is a case that's been cold for a while, not much going on, but I get a feeling that here in 2019, we'll be able to talk about some major movement in that case, if not getting a resolution to that case. Dennis feels very hopeful regarding all of this. But like anything, it's probably going to take a little time. But I think in 2019, there's going to be more action on this case than any time since Kent disappeared. The next case I'm going to talk about is one that I'm not sure I was ever going to be able to include in any update episode for the entire life of Unfound. I'm being totally honest with that. And that is the disappearance of Chris Turner. The reason I say that is because his case was closed, his missing persons case was closed shortly after it was opened back in 2016 after he disappeared. To remind you very quickly, he was seen in an apartment complex, banging on doors, and then he disappeared. A missing persons report was filed, and then a few days later it was closed because Chris's girlfriend and her mother claimed to have seen Chris. In fact, I think the story was that he actually came over to the mother's house, something like that. And so Las Vegas Metro, based on that information, closed the case. Well, nobody believes that sighting, mainly because the theory is that his girlfriend at the time, Chris's girlfriend at the time, had something to do with his disappearance. Well, Dawn, his mother, has been working very hard, enlisting a lot of people to try to get this case reopened in Las Vegas because she believes that her son was murdered. Well, the case is now reopened. I have to admit that I just never thought that was, I don't mean to be negative, but just never thought that was going to happen, but it has, and I think that she has credited some friend of hers with really pushing this, and this just happened. This just happened within the last couple weeks. So Chris Turner's case, missing persons case in Las Vegas, is open again. And I know Dawn, within that time frame in the last couple weeks, has come across some new information about Chris's girlfriend at the time that even lends more, and it's not information that I think she knew back when we did her interview. We did her interview in, what was it, August of 2017, a little over a year after Chris disappeared. And it was information that she did not know at that time, but she has learned recently that could even lend more support to the idea that she wanted Chris out of her life, that the girlfriend wanted Chris out of her life. But I will keep you posted. But I have to admit, of all the updates I'm doing on this episode, that is probably one of the biggest movements in a case that hasn't been solved, of course, yet. But now that it's reopened, a resolution to that case could come fairly quickly. Of course, that's what we're hoping for. Next, Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman. Of course, I think most, if not all of you, know that a man, his name is Ronnie Busick, has been charged with the murders of the Freeman parents and the deaths of Laura and Ashley. This happened, I believe, in April last year, and I included that in the update that I did last summer, on July 2018. But there still has been no trial yet. There's been a competency hearing. So I'm not sure what's going to go on there. I don't know how quickly things are going to happen there in Oklahoma. If you'll remember that when they finally tracked down Ronnie Busick, he was in jail, I believe, in Kansas. And I'll also remind you that there were two other men who are believed to have been involved in those murders back at the time in 1999. But those two other men have died since then. And so Ronnie Busick is going to stand trial eventually for what all three of them did. In addition, more recently, Laura's mother, went to New York City for a true crime festival there, and then finally CNN and other news outlets, swooped in to cover the case finally. In fact, I think CNN did a series on the case. It's nice of them to finally get involved. In fact, I talked about this on a YouTube live show that I do on Wednesday nights just recently, that part of the problem about these missing persons cases is that the big networks, they don't come in until there's some sort of resolution, which I think is wrong. If there was ever a missing persons case that deserved nationwide attention, it was this one, because there were two murders connected to it and there were two girls missing. But it took for Ronnie Busick to actually be charged with all of this, for the news outlets to get involved. Maybe if CNN, and I'm not picking on them, but any news outlet, national news outlet, had been involved since virtually the beginning, this case would have been solved years ago, and those two other guys would have been still alive, and all three of them could have been charged and held accountable for what happened to Mr. and Mrs. Freeman and Ashley and Laura. Instead, these major news outlets don't get involved usually until something like Ronnie Busick being charged happens, and I just think it's wrong. But Laureen went up there to New York City, and I'm not going to complain about the coverage now, but this coverage should have been done years and years and years ago. But Laureen went up there to New York City. I know that there was a GoFundMe campaign for her to afford to go up there, and I think she was interviewed and all sorts of things, which I think is great. And I have not talked to Laureen in a long time. She is under no obligation to inform me of anything, but I certainly would like to talk to her again sometime soon. Of course, the additional sad fact is that Laura and Ashley's remains have not been found yet. I'm guessing, it seems, that either Ronnie Busick has not revealed where they are, or he truthfully does not know where they are. I know that it is, I think in some of the news accounts, it's been stated that he doesn't know where they are. Doesn't know. And of course, he says he doesn't know anything about the entire case. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. But as much as this case is going to go to trial, or maybe he's going to plead guilty, I don't know what's going to go on, but their remains have still not been found. The next case is one that I'm certainly glad to include on this list. I don't know how much is going on from the law enforcement angle, but some things went on with me recently regarding this case, and it's the disappearance of Dal Phillips from Tennessee. And because of this, I got to speak to his wife, Dal's wife, Missy, recently, a couple weeks ago. And I don't like to play favorites on Unfound. My guests are all great. But every time I talk to Missy, I'm reminded how much I've enjoyed getting to know her and talk to her. I haven't talked to her very much. I'm going to guess it seems since Dal's case was covered back in late 2017. But when I do, it's always memorable and I always enjoy it. And in this case with Dal Phillips's disappearance, just recently, I'm going to say within the last month to 6 weeks, I got a message from someone on Dal's side of the family, and his family, a lot of his family resides, I believe this is from Ohio. I got a message from one of those people. I'm not going to give you the name or the Facebook account, but this person contacted me and turned around and pointed the finger at Missy, that she is responsible for Dal's disappearance. Now, I've heard a lot of things about a lot of different cases out there that Unfound has covered. A lot of crazy theories, pointing fingers all over their place. But if there is a case where a spouse is certainly not a suspect, it would be Dal Phillips's disappearance. I think that it's safe for me to say that I don't think I'm speaking out of school, that Missy and her daughter's life have gotten a lot more complicated since Dal's disappearance. They both feel that things would be a lot better if Dal was still around. There's no doubt about that. Having gotten to know Missy the way I have. If there is ever an innocent spouse in any case that Unfound is covered, it's Missy Phillips, for sure. And in getting this message, it even makes me believe more that someone on Dal's side of the family, which was something that we kind of covered in the interview, if you go back and listen to that episode, might have something to do with Dal's disappearance. Once again, I'm not going to get into all the intricacies of any of the cases in this update episode, but if you go back and listen to it, you'll know what I mean. So, and weird part is that Unfound covered Dal's disappearance a year and about 4 months ago, and this person is just emailing me now. So, I thought that was kind of weird as well. Now, I will say this. And in going back, because when I got the message, I kind of went back and did listen to part of the interview all over again. Of course, Missy and I have talked about this. I called her and talked about this message that I received. I told her who it was from and read it to her. And I think I sent a copy of it to her as well. But I'm still not sure what happened to Dal. There were a lot of things going on in his life that had nothing to do with his wife or his daughter, or he has a son as well, or his family. I think he was struggling with a lot of things mentally, and so it is conceivable that he could have walked off and done something to himself, and he just still hasn't been found. Where this happened, Helen Wood, is, I wouldn't say it's out in the middle of nowhere, but there's a lot of woods and forests and hills and valleys and streams in the area that would be very difficult to search. But on the other hand, in talking to Missy and talking about the facts of the case, it very well could be that somebody came and Dal came over to the house and somebody took Dal somewhere and he trusted the wrong person. That is just as likely in this case. I mean, and this is a particular case where I'm like split almost 50-50 between those choices. And I'm not usually like that in most cases. Maybe it's more like 75-25 with different theories. This is one where it's almost split right down the middle between Dow walking off himself and Dow being murdered. The next case I'm going to talk about probably is the toughest one to update in this entire episode. That's probably going to be 3 hours long, 30-some cases. And it is the disappearance of Tyler Stice. And this has nothing necessarily to do with his disappearance. And I think a lot of you already know where this is going, but I feel like I need to talk about it anyway. That Jessica Curtis, who is Tyler's sister, and she was the guest for that episode, she died back in October of 2018. The details of her death are not public, but I think that I've already gone on the record to say that I can't help but think that this might have been an overdose or a suicide, something like that. I do not know. I want to say that. I do not know. And I've tried to do a few inquiries trying to find out what exactly the circumstances were, but I haven't been able to find that out. I don't know, but I just can't help but lean in that direction because Jessica and I talked quite a bit after she was on the program, and she was going through a lot. We have to remember that if you don't know, that besides Tyler going missing, that Jessica had lost, I believe it was a daughter to a drowning. That's why she had been a part of this national drowning prevention organization that she was a part of. And then she lost another child to, I don't know if it was, what do they call it, SIDS or something like that. She had seen a lot in her short life. I think she was in her early 30s when she died. And it was, you can probably even tell that it's hard for me to even talk about it now. It's just difficult, even though it's been 6 months since this happened. But I was over in Orlando when I found out. And I was just happened to be over there with my sister and her husband, her son Charlie, and his 2 sons. Supposed to be having a great time. And we were going to be going out to play miniature golf. And I found out on my phone while I was in the car. We were driving over there. And it really hit me hard. And even though I talked to Jessica a lot, I wouldn't say I really knew her that well. And in fact, I'm thinking this was like a Wednesday that this happened. I had just talked to her 3 days before that. I think it was that Saturday or Sunday. She and I had exchanged messages about Tyler's case, and I still have those messages in my Messenger account on Facebook. And so I just kind of told my sister what was going on. So if she noticed while we were playing miniature golf that I was a little not myself, I just told her I needed to tell her what was going on. So when we finally did get back to the place that they were staying at in Orlando, it was dark. It was like 11:30 at night or something like that. And I just took a long walk around the complex there. And I'm just going to be honest with you. And if I can be honest about something, if I can't be honest about something, I don't talk about it. But I'm going to be honest. I had a really long cry. And I think the reason that is because I get the feeling that had Tyler's case been solved, that she might not have done that. And of course, there are a lot of suspicions out there as to what actually happened to Tyler. And I have my own beliefs. But I ended up, when I came back and everybody at that point had gone to bed and everything, I had posted put something on my Facebook page that scene from Forrest Gump where, what's her name? Robin Curtis Penn, is that her name? She was the wife of Sean Penn, but she plays Jenny in the movie, and she goes up to that house where she used to live, and her father had abused her, and I think abused. She had a sister in the movie. You know, she's thrown all those rocks, and finally she just collapses on the ground, and Forrest is there, of course, played by Tom Hanks. He says something. Sometimes there just aren't enough rocks. And I posted that, and I think that perfectly encapsulated what Jessica Curtis was going through. She suffered through so much that there's just sometimes not enough rocks to fight it all back. And it even makes me emotional. I'm going to be honest, just talking about it now. It's still very emotional for me to talk about it. Once again, even though I never met Jessica in person. But this is the toll that these missing persons cases can take on people. And, of course, like I said, Jessica had a lot of other things going on, bad things that had happened to her. But it's still very, very sad to me. Just horribly, horribly sad. The next case I want to talk about is Nicholas Masucci. Of course, the guest for that episode was his daughter Fran, who I've gotten to know very, very well. Once again, a guest that I've not met in person. In fact, I've not met most of the guests in person. Maybe it's only 4, 5, or 6. But I feel like I've really gotten to know her very well, and I think that she is so happy that she appeared on Unfound a little over a year ago, because I think since then there's been a lot of positive movement in her father's case. I don't know how much closer she is to figuring out what happened. We have to remember that this is a case that's 45 years old now. But what has happened is that another guest of mine, and I think I can talk about this. I think that they've been fairly open about this. Another guest, Dr. Eric Grabowski, who is a guest that I've met in person actually a couple times now. He and I are both from the Pittsburgh area, and he coincidentally went to the same college that I did, but after I had already graduated, showing my age there. But he decided to, I think this is the way it happened, is that he decided to get involved helping Fran do some research. And them working together, I think they've talked on the phone a few times. I don't think they've met in person, but over the phone, working together, they've been able to track down a woman who was a mystery, at least at the time that we did the interview back in early 2018. And Fran was able to talk to this woman. If you go back and listen to the episode, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it was enlightening for her, and it just added one little piece, another piece into this puzzle that she's trying to put together. And she had been trying to find this woman for a long time, and Eric was able to help her do that. And they're continuing to do research and trying to figure out what exactly happened to Nicholas. And I think it still comes down to two main choices. Either the mob did something to Nicholas, and I would never say that he was deep, deep, deep in the mob, but he certainly knew people in the mafia, had business dealings with them, and I think even we talked about in the episode when I interviewed Fran that his name was mentioned along with some mafia people in FBI files. But he was not considered a major player. I don't think he was under investigation. I don't think that the FBI was, bugging his phone or anything like that. But if you were a business person in the New Jersey area, New York area, New York City area, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it would not be surprising to me that maybe you ran into some mafia types once in a while. That wouldn't surprise me. And in fact, if you really want to go back to that episode and to bring up the other possibility in the disappearance of Nicholas Masucci, of course, the other person of interest is Fran's brother, of course, Nicholas's son. And it hit close to me because very, very coincidentally, my uncle Russ, who was married to my dad's sister, so it was my dad's brother-in-law, my uncle Russ and Fran's brother knew each other very well and were very good friends. And you can go back to the episode, and I was more than transparent about that. So this is a case that I think is further along now than it was a year ago, and I hope that continues. The next update is for J.R. Mollahan. On that episode, I had his wife Julie on. I keep in contact with Julie once in a while, although it had been a while, but just within the last couple days, we had an exchange on Messenger. And there's not really an update on the case per se, but I wanted to let all of you know that Julie has been working on a book about her experience going through everything that she's gone through since JR disappeared. And it's going to be coming out sometime. I think she put it on the back burner now for a little bit, but she has assured me that she's going to get back to it fairly quickly. And I guess it's kind of interesting for me, and I'm glad I could help out in my small way. But my belief is that she is going to be calling the book, she's going to give the title of the book the same title that I used for the episode when it came out, which was Diary of a Disappearance, because what was a big part of the interview I did with Julie last year, 2018, is that we talked about this diary that she kept as everything was happening. And that certainly helped her out a lot in remembering facts and times and dates, locations from when it all happened, because I've talked to so many families, so many guests. After a while, your memory starts to get a little clouded. But Julie kept this diary, and I think it's greatly assisted her in keeping all the facts straight from the time that JR disappeared. Well, she's going to use what I came up with for the episode, Diary of a Disappearance, as the title for her own book. And I'm very excited about that. I'm glad I could help, and I'm allowing her to use that title for free. So I look forward to it coming out, and I will surely buy it. The next case on this list is Travis Robertson, a young man who disappeared in Arkansas. His sister was on the episode, and I do follow her on Facebook, although she and I have not talked for a while. But when we did talk last, it was about a piece of information that was sent to me from a lawyer in Arkansas. I'm not going to, of course, give out the lawyer's name. I believe that this person is a listener of the program, which of course I deeply appreciate. And this person did a little digging with the expertise that this person has. And I know that I talked about this at the time that it happened. Maybe many of you missed it. I think I talked about it probably on the YouTube live show. Once again, it was 6 months ago. Time is flying, especially since my mother's death in November. It's hard to put a lot of these months in order, but it was certainly before then. Maybe it was even going back to, I don't know, last summer maybe, but I know this was not on the last update show. So this lawyer sent me a piece of information that showed that sometime after Travis disappeared, that the defense lawyer in some case filed some sort of motion, and I'm not an expert in these matters, and I'll be honest, I sent at least one, if not more, emails back to this lawyer to talk about this topic, but this person did not respond, and maybe because this is not information that was supposed to be given out, I don't know. But I'm not a lawyer. But this lawyer sent me a piece of information showing the defense lawyer, at some point after Travis disappeared, had filed a motion trying to find out if Travis was a confidential informant for the police. I don't know what happened with that. All I know is that this is real information. It wasn't cooked up. It wasn't doctored or anything like that. I believe this person who sent this to me, and I deeply appreciate this person sending it to me, and I was able to talk to Travis's sister about it. And this is relevant because during the episode, as I remember it, this belief or possibility or theory, rumor, whatever you want to call it, did come up. That was Travis kind of reporting back to the police, maybe to get off on some of the charges, problems that he had gotten into himself. And there was the speculation that the guy that he ran into in the bar when he was there with, I believe, Sonya's husband, maybe it was her boyfriend at the time, but I think it's her husband now, might have been some undercover cop who then asked Travis, hey, go out here and let's talk about something, because it was right after that Travis disappeared. That's a possibility. There's no proof of that. But we now have at least somebody within the law profession of Arkansas suspected what we talked about as just really a rumor theory during that episode. Not sure whatever came of it. Of course, Travis is still missing, so I just don't know, but I thought you'd like to know about that. The next case on this list is Zoe Campos. Most of you already know that her remains were found in November of 2018. There is a person in custody, Carlos Rodriguez. He was prominently featured in the interview that I did with Zoe's mother, Melinda. And this is a case where, from Unfound standpoint, has been resolved. That Zoe's remains have been found, and Carlos is in custody. Once again, I understand that maybe he's going to plead not guilty and maybe to try to avoid the death penalty or something in Texas. I guess that's a possibility. But being that he led them to her body, I think says a lot. So this is the only case in Unfound's existence that I would say is completely resolved. In contrast to Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman's case, where Ronnie Busick, yes, he is in custody, but these young women's remains have not been found. Until the remains are found, Unfound is going to keep talking about the case and make sure everybody remembers that. This podcast is not called Unsolved. It's called Unfound. We are looking for the people who have gone missing. That is the goal. And Ashley and Laura haven't been found yet. So we're going to keep talking about it, that case, until they are found. In Zoe's case, she has been found. There's a person in custody. And that's where we want to get with every case, of course, from Unfound's standpoint. Having said all that, I still have a ton of questions about this case. I will tell you that I've spoken to Melinda once since Zoe's remains were found, and that was when I was back in Pennsylvania for those few months, November, December, and January. And she seemed to have some things going on, and I told her I would just catch up with her somewhere down the road. I've not talked to her since. Maybe I should make some time to call her. I would certainly like to talk to her again and stay in contact with her. But I still have a lot of questions. Then what was that phone call between Zoe and Ben Flores that night? What was that? Because it exists. That wasn't a rumor. It's on her phone records. What was that then? We don't know. How is it that Zoe's remains were missed in the backyard of where Carlos and his family were living at the time? If police went over there and did check it back when Zoe disappeared, because our understanding was that they did it. That's what they did. How did they miss that the first time around? Hard to understand. And why is it then that this time Carlos felt like, of course, divulging what happened to Zoe, what he did to Zoe, and where they could find her in his backyard? Just hard to, I don't know. I'm not saying there aren't explanations. I just don't see what those explanations are right now. And I don't believe that there's been any information released for us to get a handle on these questions, because they were featured. I mean, in my discussion with Melinda, they were featured quite prominently because she thought they were important too. Well, we didn't. I mean, looking back at that episode, the last place, I'll be honest with you, the last place I thought that Zoe was going to be found was in the backyard of that house. Because, of course, why? Because we believed that the house and the property had been searched. So I just don't know. And maybe the next time I talk to Melinda, we can talk about these things. But I can tell you, I think in so many words, that we did kind of talk about this when I talked to her last. I think this was going to be in December, maybe. She didn't have any answers. And so I don't know if she has any answers now 4 months later. But if there are answers out there, I'd surely like to know what they are. The next case on this list, I don't think is going to be a surprise to anybody, is the disappearance of Thomas Brown. I can tell you that one of the main reasons that Unfound's listenership in 2018 went up by 40% is because of this case alone. I can also tell you that the reason that the Unfound podcast discussion group, a private group where people have to essentially be asked to be let in, is at 4,600 members now, and that the Unfound podcast page has about 5,000 likes on it now. Those numbers have a lot to do with this case. Maybe I just remember when Unfound covered this case that before long I was getting a lot of requests to join the discussion group from Pampa, from Perryton, from Amarillo, from Canadian, all over that area of Texas. And as far as if I really wanted to get into the details of this case, I could probably be here for an hour, but I'm not going to do that. If anybody has been following Unfound and is in the discussion group, that case is talked about more than any case that Unfound has covered. So I think probably a lot of you are well versed in that case by this time. But of course, I have to cover it. Just to offer up some thoughts, general thoughts about it and what is currently going on. I think all of you know that Thomas's remains were found in January of this year. And within, I think, and they were identified as certainly being his a few days later through DNA. And within a few hours of that, Penny's private investigator, Phil Klein, who's been working on the case, I wouldn't say since day one, but not long after Thomas disappeared, came out and said that this is now a murder investigation. Like I said, that happened sometime in January. And since then, he has made a lot of comments. He's been interviewed a couple times by KXDJ. He's made some public statements that I've gone on record as saying that are somewhat provocative. I don't know what Phil knows. I've never talked to him. I've never had an email exchange with him. I just know what all of you know regarding what he has said. I have no secret information to him, but of course I talk to Penny probably at least a couple times a week because there always seems to be something going on. But this is a murder investigation and lots of rumors. I cannot tell you how many theories and rumors and speculations and everything else that I've received either at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com or through Messenger, wherever, about what happened. A lot of speculation. And of course, what even caused more of that was when Jeff Castletine, I guess I've been saying Castletine, but I guess it's Castletine, committed suicide in February, just a few weeks after Thomas's remains were found. And that even added more fuel to the fire of rumorizing and sensationalism and hype and everything else. I've gone on the record. I do not believe that Jeff's suicide has anything to do with Thomas's disappearance and now murder. I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that, but the rumor mill is going to turn. Right now, the main focus, I will be honest with you, has for me, and has been trying to find out who exactly discovered Thomas's remains. I've had actually a listener that's gone out there and taken some pictures and drew a map. It was very helpful. But it's a little amazing to me as a case that has gotten so much coverage that we still don't know who found Thomas's remains and how they were found. Phil Klein is kind of said in so many words, but if you really look at his statement, it's quite vague too. And I'm not saying he has to reveal it to the public. I'm not saying that he has any responsibility to do that. I'm not saying the Attorney General or anybody else, the Texas Rangers, have any responsibility necessarily to reveal how the remains were found and who did it. But the other big point is that there was a reward, and the reward is not being collected. So that also fuels speculation. But that's where the case, once again, I could talk for an hour, but I do that on Wednesday nights. If you'd like to hear me talk about all the intricacies of this case, then I would go back and listen to a lot of the Unfound lives that you can find on YouTube that have been done since January. But Thomas's remains were eventually found in January. There was a service for him. I watched it. It was Facebook Live, and I watched it. I talk with Penny once in a while. The conversations I have with her continue to be confidential, but frankly, I'm still continuing to try to find out who actually found the remains and how they were found. Because the way it's been described to me by a few listeners who have gone out there in that general area is they don't believe that his remains could have been just happened to be stumbled upon. Their opinion, having lived there for many, many years. So that's all I'm going to say about Thomas Brown for this episode. The next case, Amanda Fravel. Look back at my notes from when I talked about this case. This is probably like the last case that Unfound covered before I did the update episode last summer. Very close to the last. And even at that time, checking back at my notes, people were already trying to find who her roommate at the time, this Lou Frank, might be. Lots of Lou Franks out there is the first thing that you find out. And even within Las Vegas, there were multiples. Whether you spelled it L-E-W or L-O-U or L-O-U, maybe it's short for Lewis. And then what had to be added into this is that, what was it? It was Amanda's stepfather, who I got to speak to. You know, he was inclined to believe that he didn't even think that was, he got to meet Lou Frank. He didn't even think that was the guy's real name. But I will tell you that in people who did do the search back at the time, and of course all of this information was passed on to Amanda's sister, Melissa, who was the guest for that episode, did find a couple that were possibilities. One of them is there is a Lou Frank in California who is a registered sex offender. And there are records that he did live in Las Vegas at one time, and he does fit the kind of the age range that people believed Lou was back at the time in the late 80s. Still, once again, Lou, maybe not today a very common name, but back in 1986, Lou is a more popular name. And then Frank is it's not like Smith or Brown, but a lot of people with the last name Frank out there. So once again, it made it kind of difficult to narrow it down. But I'm inclined to believe that if his real name was Lou Frank, then these people who put these lists of Lou Franks together, I think that guy is on the list. The problem is, at least in some of the cases, a lot of these men are dead now. So there's that. But Melissa has all that information, and maybe she will be able to do something with it or get somebody that can do something with it. And of course, myself and my assistants, Emily and Cherie, are always here to help. And I know that Cherie herself has taken a deep interest in that case. She did right from the beginning and was able to coordinate a lot with Melissa. Just like, for example, Emily took a deep interest in Brandy Wells' case, much more than, of course, she juggles a lot of cases, but that one, she continues to really, really keep close tabs on it. With Cherie, she has continued to keep tabs on what is going on with Amanda Fravel's case. What happened also after the last update episode is I got to speak. We were able to track down, and keep in mind, Melissa was trying to find these people for about 30 years. I was able to track down both of the people that Amanda lived with when she moved to Las Vegas. You'll remember the woman's name was Cammie, and she was there with her new husband. And I'm not going to say any last names or anything after this point. But I got to speak to Cammie. And I'm not saying I think she was trying to be as helpful as she could be. But she really did not know a lot. Could not remember a lot. The problem is that the way I remember it is that flip it around, she remembered meeting Lou Frank and her husband at the time. They are not married anymore. Her husband at the time, they were newlyweds, did not remember meeting him, or it was flipped, that he remembered meeting Lou Frank and she didn't. It was something like that. It's just, once again, it's 30 years, over 30 years. Even though these people were young at the time, that just could not remember a lot of specifics. In fact, they really couldn't even remember. In fact, even Amanda's stepfather, the guy who ended up marrying her mother later, could not remember exactly where Amanda and Lou Frank lived together. You know, that makes it really, really tough. I sent maps. I got maps from Google Earth, as close as I could get back to the late 80s. I forget how close it was, maybe mid-90s or something like that, and sent the maps to them. Just could not really, truly remember. We think it's on East Charleston somewhere, but that's about it. So, just don't know what to think. Of course, there was the idea that Lou Frank owned a boat, and I know Cherie looked into that and found some interesting information, but not sure if it's just a coincidence or it's real, just not sure. But once again, I got to speak to Cammie, got to speak to her ex-husband, and I really believe that they were trying to be as helpful as possible. I know that there might have been a suspicion at one time that maybe they knew a lot more than they were saying. And I will be honest that their stories conflict with Amanda's stepfather's story about going down there and meeting Lou Frank and everything. Just to give you an example, he still insists to this day, although I've not talked to him recently, but when I did talk to him, he insisted that Cammie introduced Lou to Amanda. She, of course, claims that is not true. That never happened. So I don't know how you square that. I don't know. So there's that. And then we cannot forget that there is a guy who was Amanda's boyfriend at the time, or they had broken up. And I think I've talked to him one time since then. I think that he's suffering from some a serious disease. I don't want to say what it is. I really don't know, but I think it's a debilitating disease that continues to get worse as you get older, some sort of autoimmune disease or something. But to be frank, not to use a pun, but what's interesting to me is that I have the ability to look at his Facebook page, and on his Facebook page, he has pictures of lots of his girlfriends from the 1980s. And he even says, yeah, I dated her in 1983. Well, from the time that in that 1985, 1986 range, when he would have been with Amanda, allegedly, no pictures. No pictures. And then the pictures start again in about 1988. That's a fact. Could be suspicious. Maybe he never took any pictures of him and Amanda together. I don't know. But being that he had all these women's pictures from back when he was a single guy, then Amanda is left out of it. It did catch my attention. So I think we've moved that case forward some. Unfortunately, Las Vegas Review-Journal and the TV stations and things have not wanted to take an interest in that case. I've emailed several times. They've blown me off. I think they've blown off Melissa as well, but hopefully she will have some more luck with Las Vegas Metro, that maybe they can go, maybe take another look at this case, because it is a cold case. And I should mention one more point. This boyfriend that Amanda had, and I think his name did come up in the episode if you go back and listen to it. His first name is Xavier. I asked Cammie and her ex-husband about him, and neither of them remember him at all. And he certainly would have stuck out because of the way he looked back he was a musician, long hair. You remember, for us old enough to remember what musicians generally look like in 1985, 86. He looked like that, and they did not remember the name. They did not remember ever seeing a guy like that. It very well could be that Amanda did not meet him until she moved out and maybe started living with Lou Frank. And you should know, in talking to Xavier, once again, it's been a while, he did not remember anything about Lou Frank. But surprisingly, he did remember Amanda living on East Tropicana. Well, that location would have been when she first moved to Las Vegas. So once again, all of this information is hard to square, with the caveat that it has been over 30 years. So Xavier remembers going to the East Tropicana address where Amanda lived with Cammie and her husband at the time. But Cammie and her husband at the time don't remember Xavier. That's another thing. I don't know how you square that. Next, Kimberly Raymer. Not much of an update regarding the case, but I thought you'd all want to know that there is now a movement up in Opp, Alabama, where she disappeared from, to name a softball field after her. And I think that they were actually taking a poll. Should they just name it? Should they name it Kim Raymer softball field, or Kimberly, to use her full name? There's a poll going on at I believe it's the Facebook page for Kimberly's disappearance. So if you'd like to take part in that poll, please do. Other than that, there haven't been any updates on the case, but I will tell you, surprisingly almost, obviously not as many emails as I've gotten on Thomas Brown, for example, but I've gotten quite a few messages regarding Kimberly's case. Once again, lots of rumors, lots of people hearing things, suspecting things, that this happened and that happened. A lot of rumors, not a lot of facts. And if some of these things are true, then we have a complete misunderstanding of what happened in Kimberly Raymer's disappearance. So I don't know what to say, but it does seem that there's a rumor mill up in the panhandle of Florida and into Alabama regarding this case as well. I just don't know, but I'm pretty sure that Kimberly's mother, who was the guest for that episode, has heard all of them. The next case I'm going to cover in this update episode is Stephen Kocher. You will remember before I started this list that I told you that I am not going to scoop anybody or steal information from anybody else who is working on a case that Unfound has covered. When those people who are doing the work, unless it's one of our own people, myself, Emily, Cherie, where we and other people, Dr. Eric Grabowski, for example, who have worked on some cases, if they've found information and we've talked about it, then of course it's going to be included in an episode, as long as I don't consider it to be private information. But if it's work that's being done outside of Unfound's umbrella, and I find out about it, and it's continuing by some private person, then I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I think that that's the ethical, moral, legal thing to do. I don't want to think that I'm stealing anybody else's information. There's already too much plagiarism that goes on in podcasting, and I'm not going to take part in that. But with Steven's case, I can tell you there is a guy that I've gotten to know. He contacted me sometime after the Steven Kocher episode came out in August. I'm going to guess it was September 2018, and we've kept in contact. He's done a lot. My experience with Steven Kocher's case was, of course, firsthand. I just happened to live in Las Vegas when it happened, and I told you that was what the Steven Kocher episode was about. There was no interview. It was just my personal experience at the time. But this guy has gone to Las Vegas. He's been on that street and done a lot. Much more than I think anybody else privately has done. And so when he is ready to release his findings, I don't know if he's going to write a book. I don't know if he's going to do a podcast. I don't know what his plans are. But he's working very hard at it, and from what I can tell, has dug up many things that I don't think are known to the public. And that's all I can really say, because I don't want to scoop him. I'm not going to give you his name and anything like that. But I get the idea he is doing. I don't know him personally. I've never met him, but I think he's doing good work, and I'll be interested to see the conclusions that he comes to. When that's going to happen, I don't know. Maybe this year, maybe next year. I really don't know. He'll work at his own pace, and when he's ready, he'll reveal it all to all of us. The next case is Bobby Campbell's. Nothing exactly going on with the case as far as I know, but recently, I think this was maybe back in February, a local TV station did a reenactment of what allegedly happened back in 1994 when Bobby went missing. This, of course, was facilitated by her daughter, Stephanie. And she is actually, I saw a news report about all this, and she is interviewed there. And you get to see the reenactment of what she says happened, and I believe her, of course, that she was over at this friend's house, and that she remembers her mother being with that guy. Remember the boyfriend she had at the time, who he was actually from England, and I think that he eventually ended up going back there after Bobby disappeared. Kind of a reenactment. I don't know if that's ever been done before. Something like that, to do a reenactment, just to kind of spur people's interest in the case and publicity for it. Maybe somebody will remember something. This was done by the Utah Cold Case Coalition. Remember, we talked about them earlier with the Jeff Nichols case. And then a BYU professor also took part in putting this all together. I'm not going to say it's necessarily a bad idea, but I've already been on the record a few times that I worry about reenactments, whether they were done on Unsolved Mysteries going way back in the day or on Disappeared. What I worry about them is that they can start to put false memories in people's heads. I think the best example is of the Dale Kerstetter case, which is not being included in this list today. But Unsolved Mysteries covered the case way back when, and they did a reenactment. Well, what has happened? Now most people, when they see that video, the pictures and everything, they think that that is the actual real video, and it's not. So that's what makes people then start believing things that aren't true, and that's the last thing any of these cases need. So I hope that doesn't happen in this case, where people start watching it and then start thinking that, well, somebody was there. You just don't know what people are going to think. And the other problem is that many times reenactments are guesses. I realize they tried to do as best they could with Bobby's case and the reenactment of it, but no reenactment is going to be 100%. There's going to have to be some guessing that goes on. Why is there going to be guessing? Because, well, the person's missing. We don't know. And that's why, like, when I watch Disappeared, as good as the show Disappeared has been, but I also, of course, a lot of criticisms for it, those reenactments are just dramatizations. Those aren't facts. Just remember that. But I hope what Stephanie put together here with the Utah Cold Case Coalition and this BYU professor, I hope it takes the case somewhere. I really, of course, I hope that. I just worry about in the long term, is this going to start false memories with people? The next update is for Alyssa Turney. This is a case that Unfound covered back in, I think it was September of 2018, maybe into October, early October. And her sister was the guest. Well, there is a podcast devoted exclusively to Alyssa's disappearance. It's not like Unfound, of course. Unfound, just one case per episode, one episode per case. And whereas this one has multiple episodes, I think there's at least 8 or 9, 10 at least out there. I do not know if they're all done doing this series of shows. I don't know. I will admit that I haven't listened to it, not personal or anything else. Just with as busy as I am, I haven't been able to listen to it. But you should check it out for yourself to see what you think. My perception also in following the Facebook page for Alyssa's disappearance is the chorus continues to get much larger and much louder that her father needs to be interrogated again regarding her disappearance. Of course, we talked about him quite a bit during that episode, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But I don't know if it's ever going to happen. He does seem like a very good choice, and I think that it seems to me that anybody that finds out about this case, they are just one more person that is added to the chorus saying that pretty sure that this father, he did something, just something doesn't seem right. And I want you to know that I'm part of that chorus as well. There doesn't seem to be anybody who is hearing about Alyssa's disappearance for the first time, then listening to the Unfound episode or the episodes that they're doing exclusively for Alyssa's case, that somebody's coming away and saying, nope, I don't think the father's involved. I don't think there's anybody like that out there. So that is what's going on with Alyssa's case at this point. The next one we're going to talk about is probably one of the most recent updates, newest information that I've gotten before recording this episode. I started actually recording this on April 3rd, 2019, and now I'm going to be completing it right now on April 4th, 2019, is the disappearance of Lacey Buenfil. This is kind of a unique case for me in that I actually got to meet the guest before we did the episode. In fact, I'm going to say at least maybe a month before. And of course, her name is Cindy Fox, and she is Lacey's mother-in-law. I think that was the first mother-in-law we've had on an episode. And the most recent information is that she has been declared deceased, and there is a death certificate now that exists for her, and that can start a whole new process in all of this. And I've talked to Cindy. I talked to Cindy a couple days ago through Messenger, not on the phone, but on Messenger, and she was filling me in on what happened. And what else has gone on is that there are now, I think she said, 3 investigators now looking into this. And I can't tell you that the angle that they're looking at, but I can say that it was something. And in fact, when Cindy I was sending this, she even said, "You know what, Ed, you were kind of right. They're going in the direction that you brought up in, one of the first conversations that Cindy and I ever had before the interview ever took place." Well, it seems to me this is the way the investigators are looking at it now, which I don't know what's going to happen with this, but um, it was certainly interesting that she would say that. I just offer up, and you should know, maybe this is a good time. I need to talk about this. Even though we don't talk about theories during interviews or even in my summations for a case, myself and the guest do talk about theories behind the scenes, just to try to understand the facts a little bit more. Does this fact make sense? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And that can be very helpful for the guest, for the family, just using my experience after 120 cases. The reason I don't do it in episodes is because I never want to push or pull the listeners in any particular direction. I want them to come to their own conclusions from what they hear, from their own experience, their own life experiences, what they think they know about disappearance cases. So it was interesting to me that she told me the direction she thinks these investigators are going to go, and she was like, you brought that up. I'm paraphrasing, but, when we talked, it seems sensible, just never can tell. But I'm not going to say what that direction is because I don't want to ruin anything. But that's information that just came out within the last couple days. Cindy got interviewed by a TV station in Orlando. Orlando is, I wouldn't say it's close to where Lacey disappeared, but I'd say it's closer than Tampa is. And it sounds to me like this TV station was instrumental in having this all happen with this death declaration. Because I think that Cindy had been trying to do this for a while and wasn't getting anywhere. Then she got a hold of this TV station, and they made things happen. So I love to hear stuff like that. And Cindy is very excited about where this is all going to go now. Okay, I just took a break there to count how many more cases we have to go. 8 cases. And the next one on the list is Jansen Brewer and Daniel Braden. What happened after the episode came out is that I was able to speak, once again, not on the phone, but through Facebook, with Jansen's sister-in-law. She is married to one of Jansen's brothers, I believe his older brother. Now, you should know, and full disclosure on this, and I don't think that Jansen's mother will mind me saying this, but Laura, who is Jansen's mother, of course, she was the interview for the episode, she and this particular son and his wife, they do not get along. I preface all of this with that. All right, so I can tell you, it seems to me that there are some inconsistencies. These could be nothing. They could be something. I don't know. All right, between what Laura told me and what this woman told me. But what happened was that this sister-in-law, I'm not going to give you her name, told me that she and her husband were the ones who saw the video of the night that Jansen and Daniel disappeared. Now, the problem is that there is a discrepancy in the day. Laura claims that, because what happened when they were getting along better when Jansen disappeared is that after this brother and his wife saw the video, they went to find Laura to tell her about it. The claim is that they claim it was Saturday. Of course, the belief is that Jansen disappeared on a Friday night, and even that, there seems to be debate between all of them when the actual day was. And Sunday, Laura claims it, though, it was Sunday that she found out about this video, and this sister-in-law is claiming it was Saturday. And it's a little hard to explain because this is not a disappearance that happened 20 years ago. This is not like Amanda Fravel's where there seem to be inconsistencies that could be dismissed as simply being people's memories just being a little off after all this time. This is a case that just was in the last few years. So what this woman says she and her husband, Jansen's brother, saw on the video is this. Now, it should be known that Daniel Braden is not seen on the video. Jansen pulls up in this truck. He pulls up in the truck that he was borrowing, once again, from that friend of his. And he meets with two guys in another truck. And there's a guy that gets out of the passenger side door of this other pickup truck. And who is it? But Chris Luna, who Laura saw with Jansen, that day, that Friday. Chris Luna is on the video. Jansen allegedly gets into the truck with Chris, and whoever is driving the truck, I think it's night, so you can't tell, and they drive away. Then later, the truck comes back. Chris Luna gets out of the truck, gets into the truck that Jansen was driving, and drives away. And Jansen is not seen on that video. In fact, it looks to them like there were only two. So there was three guys, including Jansen, when they left, and when they came back, there was only two guys, and the guy that was missing was Jansen. This is all alleged, and I've talked to this woman about this a couple times, and I've told Laura about all of this. She doesn't know what to make of it. Now, the bad part is that this video, as far as we can tell, is gone. Now, you should know the circumstances under which they found the video. And this is the story they're telling. It stretches my imagination a little bit, but I'm not going to say it's impossible. When it was first realized that Jansen was missing, that they had an idea somehow that this sister-in-law and Jansen's older brother, his husband and wife, they had an idea of where Jansen might have gone to fish. And remember, fishing was a whole part of this story, that Jansen and Chris Luna were going to go fishing at a certain place. And these two thought that they would know where Jansen and Chris would go fishing. They got there. Well, there is a store, a bar, something like that near there. Maybe 100 yards away, something like that. They went over there to ask about the video. Now, keep in mind that at that point, they wouldn't have known when Jansen disappeared. For some reason, though, the person who was working at this place when these the husband and wife, once again, to explain this again, this is Jansen's older brother and his wife. They show up there. They ask if they could see the video. The person says yes. And for some reason, from like that morning, they were thinking that the disappearance was that morning. Well, for some reason, the person who works there got the tape, or maybe it was digital by now, digital file MP4, I guess it would be. Went the whole way back to the night before, and then it was in the process of this person going probably farther back than was expected that they happened upon this video of what I just described that happened at like 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. Whereas the way this woman made it sound to me is they were only expecting to see the video from earlier that morning, maybe after the sun came up, like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I don't know what to make of it. So it was like a double whammy that the brother and his wife requested a time frame in which it doesn't seem like Jansen disappeared and Daniel disappeared. Once again, Daniel was not on the video, though. And then on top of that, the person working at this establishment makes a mistake and just happens to go back to like midnight the night before, and then fast forward and happens to run into Jansen being on this video at like 2:40 in the morning or whenever it was. So 2 mistakes actually ended up causing them to actually find something. Makes me suspicious. Okay? Now you should know, Laura is suspicious of Jansen, even though it's her own son, Jansen's older brother, and his wife. You should know that. And I don't think I'm saying anything out of school here, because I think that the older brother and his wife already know that. So I don't know what to make of all of this. And of course, there's Daniel Braden. And then, the other part of this is Scott Hughes. Now, if you remember that episode, if you're not familiar with that episode, if you're new to Unfound, please go back and listen to that episode. That Scott Hughes owned the truck that Jansen was driving around. There is the belief that Scott Hughes is gay and he might have had a crush on Jansen, and that it was Scott who originally met with Daniel Braden and was allowing Daniel to stay at his house. I actually got to speak to Scott Hughes. Once again, over Messenger, messages that are now saved on my computer. And how this all started was that he wanted to be allowed into the Unfound podcast discussion group, and I wouldn't let him in. I would not let him in because he, in my opinion, is a suspect in this disappearance, and I just don't know what kind of havoc he would spread by getting in there and trying to control the conversation or whatever he would do. Okay, and I wouldn't let him in, and he got ticked about it, and we ended up having a conversation about everything. And I posted it in the group, and I think, where else did I post it? I'm going to have to think about that. But after we were done talking, and he was not very pleased with it, I'll go into the context of it in a second. I posted it in the group as a file that everybody could read. And the problem is when you copy something from Messenger, it doesn't quite make a lot of sense. And plus, it's not formatted. I did the best I could. But I don't think that you need to read every word in that conversation to know that a lot of what Scott is saying doesn't make any sense. He is saying that the reason he never knew Daniel Braden until a few days before, and then he got a call that he was supposed to meet somebody somewhere. He showed up, and this guy, Daniel Braden, claims he didn't know his name. And Scott portrayed himself to be sort of something like, Underground Railroad or something like that. I think the guy is totally delusional. I don't believe a word that he said to me in that entire conversation. My opinion, you read it, you see what they think. And I think if he listens to this episode, I think he already knows that. Of course, it's his truck that Jansen was driving, his truck that went missing, and never once did he file a missing vehicle report. And he's just a very squirrely guy. That should not be a surprise, I think, to anybody. But he got very ticked off at me, and I told him that the conversations that we had were on the record, and then he didn't like that I posted for everybody to see, and I think I made one more enemy in my life. But if those are the kind of enemies that I have, then I must be doing okay. I just don't find his story believable at all regarding Daniel Braden. I, however, also have suspicions that the whole entire way that this video was found doesn't make a ton of sense to me either. From my experience, I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just in my experience, this is not how usually videos are found, by mistake. When people are looking in one area and then the person operating the video system just happens to go back to a different area and they happen to see something. And that these people who saw this video didn't make sure that it was protected so the police could come and get it. We just have to go on their word. Unfortunately, Lord doesn't trust either of these people. And then you add on top of it Scotty Hughes. And just so many surly people in that case. Of course, we run into that a lot with these missing persons cases. But so the video, there was how the video was discovered, but it's believed that it's all gone. And then I got to talk to Scott Hughes, who did not make any sense to me, and I think he was just making stuff up. And if somebody's I have a feeling that somebody's gonna make stuff up, then I can't help but think that they are involved in the disappearance themselves. Next case, Ashley Summers. I have to say that when we were able to cover this case in early November, this was one of the last cases I covered before I had to go back to Pennsylvania because of my mother's illness. And then if you'll remember, I took off a couple weeks because of that. But this is one of the last cases that we were able to do before that. However, this case wasn't, I guess, planned to be this way, but it was certainly a fortuitous time to cover Ashley's case because not long before this, the last guy to allegedly see Ashley, her uncle Kevin, was charged with multiple charges. Yes, I just said that. Regarding abuse, rape, attempted rape. And since then, the charges have kept piling up since November. And I got to talk to Linda, who was, if go through this, she is Ashley's ex-grandmother. Linda was married to Ashley's grandfather, and then they got a divorce. But Kevin has all these charges against him, and my impression is that this is an investigation now that of course they're going to look into Ashley's disappearance now that they have Kevin in custody, that this might be an investigation that spreads out to other people in the Summers family. My impression. I'm not saying that Linda's actually sure of that or anything, but what came up in the episode is the way Linda remembers it back to that time is different than the way the disappearance was portrayed, for example, on the show Disappeared, because that's one of the cases that they covered. That there was a discrepancy as to where Kevin's brother Keith and his wife were living at the time. Were they living right in Cleveland or were they living outside of Cleveland? And my impression is that before this is all over, is that Linda is going to be right and these people were lying. She did not believe that Keith and his wife were living in town at the time of Ashley's disappearance, but that's what they say in the Disappeared episode. She believes they were living outside of town, much more in a rural area. And if that is the case, and of course Kevin is the last one to see Ashley, and I don't think it's hard to theorize that maybe Kevin tried something with Ashley or had been doing things to her already since she was living with him, and she finally decided to fight back and something happened. That's not hard to imagine, but we ended up doing that episode right after this all happened, and I think it was a high-quality episode, and I will continue to keep you posted on it. Linda and I are in contact. Like I said, I think I spoke to her maybe a week and a half ago, maybe, time's flying, maybe 2 weeks ago about all of this, and they are certainly bringing a lot of charges against Kevin. The next case I want to talk about is the disappearance of Judith Emke. Of course, I had her daughter on as a guest. And probably the big update with this is that I got to speak to Pat Richardson. He was the next door neighbor. He was spoken about quite a bit in the interview. And I got to speak with him. This was when I was still in Pennsylvania. I remember where I was. I remember this conversation. Because it certainly sticks out in my mind. I felt fortunate that I was able to talk to him, and I wrote about it some in the Patreon blog, but if you're not a Patreon supporter, I will tell you about it right now. Pat and I talked for about over a half hour, then we hung up, and then he called me back, as I remember. Or maybe I called him back to ask him one more question. I don't remember exactly how that happened. It's like we had a long conversation, Then we hung up, and then we had a shorter conversation again, like minutes later. And I forget if I called him back or he called me back. I can't remember. But do I think he was truthful with me? I really don't know. I really don't. This is another disappearance that is far in the past. He is, in my mind, he should be considered a suspect just because he was the next door neighbor. But to get into the specifics of it, he did not come right out and confirm or deny that he and Judith did have something going on the side. I asked him if he thought that Judith would ever run away. He denied it. He thought that, no, she would have never left her kids. And so then I asked him, so then are you saying that you believe that Judith's husband did something to her? And he goes, well, no, I'm not saying that either. And I even said to him, because I have it in my notes, well, Pat, there's not many choices left. And he goes, well, I'm just telling you what I think. So he doesn't think that she ran off. And he wasn't willing to say that Judith's husband did anything to her either. And I thought it was pretty useless for me to just come out with, did you do something to her? Of course, he's going to say, no, I'm not. It's over the phone. Maybe in person I would have chanced just to see his blinking and his shifting his weight around if he seemed a little scared about that question. But over the phone, I don't know how much it's really worth. There are things that I know about Pat from Judith's daughter that I can't talk about. There were things that we couldn't talk about regarding him in the episode for certain reasons. And so I probably look upon him even more negatively than all of you do, once again, from information that Darlene and I talked about, but I can't talk about it here, and that's part of the confidential conversation that will always just be between me and Darlene. But what I was kind of able to determine was possibly the reason that there might have been a discrepancy in Pat's alibi for those days during Thanksgiving. If you remember, the belief was that his story changed. He said he was with his brother, and then said he was with his boss. It seemed like the story changed. But what I found out, I'm guessing this is actually the truth. I don't know how I would go about proving this, but Pat did what he says is that he did spend it with his brother, but his brother was at the brother's boss's house. Why? Because the brother married the boss's daughter. And I can see it very easily that if the police did go to talk to Pat, or when they did, because we know they did, that when they wrote down the information, they thought that Pat meant Pat's own boss, not his brother's boss. And it would make sense that if the brother marries the boss's daughter, that they would spend holidays together. And then Pat, being a single guy, at least at the time, might be invited over. So that kind of makes sense, but I'm going to guess the boss is dead at this time, and I'm going to guess the brother probably does not remember what he did for Thanksgiving that year. It's been a lot of Thanksgiving since. You might be able to guess, but that would be probably the best that he would be able to do. He'd never probably pick out the difference between Thanksgiving in 86 or one in 88 or 89. Who knows? But I think that it's a viable possibility. Is it the truth? I just don't know. All I can say is Pat likes to talk. I got the feeling that had I wanted to talk to him all day, he would have been happy to do so. I can't remember why we hung up and then we talked again for a few minutes. I don't remember why that was. But I don't get the feeling. I mean, yes, he was a little cagey with me. Not wanting to admit whether he did have something going on with Judith or not, but it could be for the very simple reason that he's married now. And of course, he didn't get married till years later. I don't think he got married till the mid-90s, but Do you really want your wife to find out that when you were a single guy, you were getting it on with a married woman who is now missing? I'm not sure his wife would know that or not. So I can understand why he might be a little cagey about that, even if he wasn't sure where the conversation is going to go. And I never told him that the conversation is going to be confidential. Unless it's an actual guest for the episode, then conversations generally that I have after that, especially if there are people of interest, people like that, then everything is on the record, always. Pat Richardson will continue to be a good choice in Judith's disappearance. That's nothing personal against him. It's nothing that he led me to think during our conversation. I just think that we all heard enough in the interview to think that. But I think we also heard enough in the interview to think that Judith's husband could have done it, or we'd also heard enough to think that maybe she ran off on her own. Just hard to say. Is that case ever going to be solved? It's been 30-some years. That's going to be a tough one. The next case, Tim Beauchart. Nothing really going on, what I would call new news for Tim's case. Of course, now we're getting, as you can tell, we're getting very close to the present. Tim's was done right here at the beginning of 2019, so the rest of the cases will be from that time frame. Of course, the closer they are to now, the less likely I'm going to have updates, but I still have some cases to go. What caught my eye, and I think somebody sent me actually this, it wasn't me, I don't think I originally found it, but I think somebody sent me the article, is that there was a big roundup within the last few weeks. Once again, I'm recording this on April 4th, 2019, so sometime in maybe mid-March, that a bunch of Latin Kings gang members were rounded up in the Laurel, Mississippi area. This is significant because Tim was allegedly a member of that gang. Could this mean something? It was because of Unfound covering. I do not believe that. I'm not saying that. This is a case that I think has a lot to do with gang activity, although it may not appear on the surface, but there is a reason that I did call that episode All in the Gangs. Tim was in a gang, and these other guys were in different gangs, and I postulated at the time, could that have been the issue regarding Tim and the reason that he disappeared? But just maybe, with all these Latin Kings being rounded up, maybe one of them knows something about Tim's disappearance. This is another case where I think there are a lot of possibilities. Could it have been he ran off? Could be. Could it be that he overdosed because he was struggling with an addiction? Sure. Could it be that he was murdered? Sure. Could it have been an accident of some type? Sure. I'm just, being honest with you. But it is curious that now these Latin Kings were rounded up in the exact area where Tim went missing, and I'm going to guess that probably Tim knew some of these guys. I can continue to keep my eyes peeled for more information, and I'm sure all of you will do that as well, and hopefully you'll send me anything if you see something. The next case I want to talk about is Juanita Nelson's. I have to admit that I had to think long and hard what I wanted to say about this case before doing this particular recording. If you don't know, I record each of these cases individually, then put them all together. This is not one all continuous thing of me talking for like 2 hours or however long it is now. What happened after Juanita Nelson's episode came out is that almost immediately, Juanita's father, who is mentioned in the episode several times, wanted to talk to me. And Katie made that happen, and he called me on Super Bowl Sunday. During the Super Bowl is when we talked. As my recollection has it, that we started talking sometime during halftime and then concluded somewhere near the end of the third quarter. However long that was is about how long the conversation went. he claimed that some of the things that Katie said were not true. For example, that he claimed that he often, if not always, drove the kids to school, particularly around the time that Juanita disappeared. Of course, that contradicted what Katie said, that she said that he never drove the kids to school. So I don't know how you reconcile that after all this time. Probably more distressing to me, once again, I've talked to a lot of parents over the last 2.5 years about the disappearance of their children. I talk to parents more than any other group, any other demographic that appears on Unfound. He made the claim that Juanita's boyfriend was not abusing her, despite Katie and Juanita's other sister, Marjorie, believing that. Mr. Nelson claimed that it was actually the opposite, that Juanita, his daughter, was beating up on her boyfriend, a boyfriend who obviously is a person of interest in her disappearance to this day. I'm not a parent. I'm not here to tell people how to parent their kids, and I really try to watch that as a person with no kids. I was a kid once, but I've never been a parent. But that seems to me like a very unusual statement. Second of all, I asked him about allowing Juanita's boyfriend to still come over to the house even after Juanita disappeared, and Mr. Nelson claims that not for 1 second did he ever think that Juanita's boyfriend had anything to do with her disappearance. Now, I have to tell you, that flies in the face of virtually every other parent that I've ever talked to on Unfound who's lost a daughter. And most of them automatically think that the man in the young woman's life is the culprit. They may be right, they may be wrong, but in virtually all of the cases, they have their suspicions. Mr. Nelson's talk with me, and I want you to know none of it was confidential. In fact, I got permission to record it, so I have it to this day on my computer. I told him right away that this conversation was being recorded. And I have no plans to release it to the public. If he hears me talking about it here, if he says that's not what he said, then I'll gladly release it, but for now, it's private. But I do have a recording of it. But not once did he ever think that Juanita's boyfriend had anything to do with her disappearance. So, my overall impression of talking to Mr. Nelson is that the conversation was so much about him. That all he wanted to talk about how great of a father was, how great he's this, and all these things he's done, and how great he is, and how he's doing up to this day, and everything. And that is contrary to any conversation that I've ever had with any parent who has lost a child. All they want to do is talk about their child and how great he or she was, on and on and on. You've heard them on the program do this. Instead, he wants to claim that actually it was Juanita who was beating up on her boyfriend. Despite what Juanita's sister said. Now, maybe Katie was maybe too young to understand it, but Marjorie, who was older than Juanita, that is surely not what she told me. And she remembers it actually quite clearly back at that time. Although she did not appear in the program, I did talk to her. My impression is that Mr. Nelson, I'm not saying he had anything to do with his disappearance, which takes me to the next part, is that after the episode came out, Katie went on and posted a long paragraph on her Facebook page. And in it, she says that she is sorry that she did not defend and stick up for her father more during the interview. And I want to make clear to everybody that all topics in all interviews that are ever conducted on Unfound are pre-approved by the guest. We don't talk about anything they don't want to talk about. If they don't want to say names, we don't say names. I like to say names, and I will tell them that. If they don't want to do it, that's what I will go with. There are no gotcha questions. There is nothing. This is not some political program where a politician comes on and I'm here to catch them in, a contradiction from an interview they did 20 years ago. That's not what Unfound does. That's a different type of journalism than what we're doing on Unfound. We are here to get information out. I don't want to surprise my guests with any questions because I want them to be prepared. If they sound good and they know what they're talking about, then that helps more people understand the case, and that helps the case get solved, at least more likely get solved. Okay? I have no interest in trying to surprise my guests with questions because that doesn't help anybody. Most importantly, it doesn't help solving the case. But when she says I should have defended my father more, I did the interview, she did the interview, you have listened to it. When you listen to it, do you think that I'm trying to attack her father? My guests are the expert on these cases, not me. I try to learn as much as I can to be a good host, to be a good interviewer, to help them along, to craft the interview in a way that is understandable to all of you. So if she thinks that she didn't defend her father, that's not the way the interview went. I asked the questions and she answered them. And this is what goes back to what I tell a lot of people regarding Unfound. We do not go, quote unquote, go after people on Unfound. What we do is ask questions and expect the truth. And I can't help if the facts make some people look more likely as suspects than others. I can't help that. These are the people who know the information, not me. We meet, they tell me things. I'm not the one answering the questions, they are. So if Katie is looking back at this interview, or maybe I think what has happened is that her father put pressure on her to type that and guilted her or something. If to her or anybody around her makes it look like her father could be guilty in Juanita's disappearance, it's because of the answers that Katie gave to the questions that she knew were coming. Okay? I just want to make that clear. I'm not trying to trick anybody. Most of the time in these cases, I don't care who the suspect is or anything else. I just want the case to be solved. That doesn't mean we don't talk about the people around the missing person, whether it's Thomas Brown's case or Zoe Campos's case or Laura Bible, Ashley Freeman, whoever. We will name names, but we will just state the facts. Where they were, what they said, what they did, do they have an alibi, etc. So when somebody she says that she should have defended her father more, that implies that I was going after her father, which I was not. Okay, I was not. I was simply asking the questions. The next case, Mary Lands, and we go to another phone call that I had that wasn't very nice, I guess you could say. At least Mr. Nelson didn't hang up on me, and I have to admit, looking back at that we hung up, we said goodbye. I've not talked to him since, but neither of us hung up on each other. Well, once again, that takes me to Mary Land's case. And this is something that just happened very recently. When was it? Monday? Tuesday? Sue Berkwald called me. Sue, once again, don't want to go through the facts of the case, but Sue was friends with Mary Lands. And I talked about this last night on the YouTube live show. And, of course, Tim Bryant, who was a crooked cop in the town where Mary disappeared, He used Sue as the reason that he called Chris Pratt 36 hours after Mary disappeared. And once again, if that sounds unfamiliar to you, maybe didn't listen to that episode, I urge you to go back and listen to it. Well, it's been, a month since Mary's case came out, and I've heard nothing from Sue. Heard nothing from her for a month. Then all of a sudden, I get a call from her, and she leaves a message, and she leaves a message, but she doesn't tell me what she wants to talk about. Now, in my life, even well before I start Unfound, anytime somebody leaves you a message, and they say they want to talk, there's a reason they aren't telling you the topic on what they want to talk about, the topic in which they want to speak to you about. So I called her back, and the phone call lasted, I didn't actually check the time, but if it went 4 minutes, that would probably be long. Right from the start, she claimed that this is kind of like, the Juanita Nelson situation all over again. Is that she claims that I made it look like she and Tim Bryant were having a relationship. Okay, that's what she said. I made it look like that. Now, just like any other episode, in the Mary Lands episode, I spoke for a total by myself of about, 7 minutes at the beginning? I don't know. I know the 7 minutes at the end, 15 minutes. The rest of it was just the interview that I did with Mary Land's cousin, Angie. But she claims I made it look like she was having a relationship with Tim Bryant. I said, no, I didn't. Well, I'm getting people have listened to it, and they're telling me this. Now, keep in mind, the episode's been out for a month. And I sent her a link to the episode immediately when it came out that particular Friday. She's calling me a month later to tell. So obviously she listened to it, didn't have any problem with it. But then when other people allegedly said this to her is when she started to have a problem. So I don't know what to make of that. But she started going in on me, kept saying it, I kept saying it, and I finally just had to tell her, you know why they probably think that, Sue? Because in the last 15 years since Mary disappeared, not once, even though you have admitted that you would see Tim around that time and even after, sometimes, not once have you ever gone up to him and asked him why he used you as the reason for that call that night when you claim you weren't with him. Maybe that's the reason people have thinking, that's not me putting that out there. Those are facts. The fact is, he used you as the reason for his call, and the fact is, you have never talked to him about it, even though he has kind of dragged you into this case. That's the reason that people maybe think something more is going on than what you've let on after all these years. Well, right about that time, she hung up on me. So this is just how I want, and I know most of you have been listening to Unfound since the beginning, or you've gone back and listened to all the old episodes. Maybe you found it after the first year, the second year, and you've gone back. And I get messages from new listeners all the time. Man, I'm really binging. There's 120 episodes. It's great to binge on it now. You know how I do my business by this time. That I just ask the questions. Now, and most of the time, I know what the person is already going to answer. Why? Because we've gone over the information and gone over it to make sure that I understand it, they understand it, and the points that we're trying to make. But I will admit, once in a while, you'll even hear it during an episode when I find out something that I didn't know before that never popped up in prior discussions. You've heard me say that. Well, I just tell all of you, listeners, this is something that I'm learning for the first time. I did not know that. So I take the attitude regarding Sue's complaints the same way I take the complaints from Katie and what she posted on her Facebook page. That there is an insinuation that, is it insinuation? Yeah, or an inference that I'm trying to make things look a particular way. And that is not the case. I just answer. I don't state the facts. My guests state the facts. I just ask the questions. So, obviously, I'm on Sue's bad list now, which I can live with. But here's another circumstance that I thought all of you should know about. Okay, 2 more cases to go. The next one we're going to talk about is Devin Brown Bucetta's. And there has been a lot of movement on this case since even Unfound covered it, 3 weeks ago? Now you have to remember, and I'm not going to say that it's all because of Unfound. You will remember that Devin Brown Bucetta's case was one that was covered by the Tribune Review at the end of 2018. Now, what exactly happened there was that Devin's case was supposed to be covered the last Sunday of October of 2018. Well, what happened right at the same time was the synagogue shooting there where many people were murdered. It's a massacre. And so that, of course, is going to push everything else off, and everybody's going to concentrate on that reporting from a reporter standpoint, which, of course, makes sense. So Devin's article was moved to sometime in November. Even so, my belief is that the article that was featured in the Trib back in November caught the Pittsburgh police's attention because now Wilshire is actually getting to speak to a detective in the department, and it seems like they have this one-on-one relationship now. And I think that in the interview, you even got a sense of that. That had been happening even before I interviewed Wilshire for the Unfound episode. And you should know, and I think I also said this in the episode, Wilshire came to me saying, yeah, I want to be on the program. Now, that was not something that after the article came out, I said, well, Wilshire, you should come on Unfound. She came to me, and I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Well, in that time frame between the article coming out and then Wilshire contacting me about being on the program, these conversations started between her and a detective there. And they've been very, very productive. Now, I can't go into all the specifics about this, unfortunately. Wilshire has not given me permission to do that. I'm not saying she says I can't, but there's been no explicit permission for me to talk about everything. So what I can tell you is this, is that my perception is that the investigation could go in a different direction. Now, you have to remember, who did we talk about? We talked about Hamed, Devin's husband who wanted a divorce. And, of course, he got a divorce no more than a month after she disappeared. We talked about the father of Devin's daughter. And we found out some things about him since the interview was conducted, and it was my assistant, Cherie, who found out some of that. But on top of that, there is now a new line of inquiry because of the conversations that Wilshire has had with this detective. That's all I can really say. Somebody who was not mentioned, a situation that was not mentioned in the interview at all. Really, why? Because Wilshire didn't know about it, and I didn't know about it. So there is still breaking news going on in this case, even all these years later, even though it was cold by most people's criteria for many years. I know that there wasn't any publication or reporter, TV station in Pittsburgh that had covered Devin's disappearance in years. But here we are in early 2019, and things are happening. And I point directly back to the article that the Trib did. Now, granted, I was the one who found Wilshire to make it happen, but they were the ones who eventually decided to cover her disappearance. And I think on the strength of that, That's why this is all happening now. And I'm happy to have played my small part in all of it. I know Wilshire could not be happier about this, moving forward after years and years of nothing happening. So I will keep you posted, and if Wilshire says that I can release some of the things that she knows, then I will do that. But at the time I recorded this part of the program, I believe that what I've found out, what she has told me, should probably remain off the record for now. But it's a lot of good information that's pushing this case forward. And finally, the last case, Shanna Boydo. This is more of a clarification than an update. What had happened was the Sunday after Shanna's episode came out, I conducted the Think Tank on Patreon with those Patreon supporters who tune in on Sunday nights. And afterwards, I called her mother to talk about what we talked about in the think tank. And Angela clarified something for me, that between the time that I interviewed her for the episode and me calling her that night, that Sunday night, which might have been a span of about a week, she found out that Kyle, who was Shanna's boyfriend at the time, remember there was this alleged trip they were going to take to California. She told me that Kyle has actually passed a lie detector test regarding Shanna's disappearance. That's what she told me. And that was something that maybe we kind of glossed over during the interview, or I forgot to bring it up. I really don't remember how that worked out. But she was very clear with me that Kyle passed the lie detector test. I realized that lie detectors tests can be fooled both ways. Lie detectors can think that people are lying when they're telling the truth, and the machines can think people are telling the truth when they're actually lying. That's the reason it's not used in court. But Kyle was sticking by his story that Shanna ran off into the woods from that particular road in Minnesota. That's what he was asked about. That's what he said. And the machine said that he's telling the truth. So you can figure that into your theorizing and speculation for Shanna's disappearance. And now if you could pause whatever else you are doing in your life while you're listening to this episode, I'm going to read off the entire list of everyone who has been covered by Unfound since its inception in September of 2016. Suzanne Lyle, Jason Jolkowski, Jesse Foster, Rose Marie Gayhart, Ben Padilla, Kelly Rothwell, Joshua Guimond, Donnie Smatlack, Andrea Bowman, Robin Abrams, Regina Marie Boss, Christopher Hyde, Jeff Nichols, Rebecca Gary, James Walker, Teresa Butler, Charlotte Paulus, Lola Fry, Eric Franks, Jeff Joseph, Donna Mikolenko, Dave Madot, Kent Monroe, and Omar Shearer, Claudia Wells, Peggy and Patty McDaniel, Shannon Turner, Brandy Wells, Cleshindra Hall, Ronnie Russell, Esther Westenbarger, Shane Fell, Ashley Eifert, Brandon Williams, Craig Freer, Pamela Golden, Chip Campbell, Amanda DeGuio, everyone on Flight 370, April Pitzer, Jennifer Wilkerson, Kent Jacobs, Aaron Gilbert, Tammy Leppert, Crystal Morrison, Chris Turner, Linda K. Carroll, Nikki McCown, Helen Diamond, Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman, Lucinda Hewells, Ashley Kohler, Debbie Lowe, Patrick Beavers, Clinton Nelson, Troy Galloway, Patty Action, Danielle Bell, Evelyn Hartley, Dal Phillips, Tyler Stice, Bill Underhill, Patty Taylor, Aaron Barnard, Jeremy Burt, Brian Sullivan, Nikki Wells, Marina Bolter, Mandy Stokes, Greg Brooks, Rebecca Henderson, Dominique Holly Grisham, Tiffany Daniels, Nicholas Masucci, Donald Irwin, Billy DiSilvestro, Renee Yeargain, Mikkel Biggs, Al Copper, J.R. Mullahan, Jamie Bowen, Travis Robertson, Rosemarie Rapp, Kristen Modafferi, Zoe Campos, Sean Ginyard, Thomas Brown, Amanda Fravel, Julie Early, Ellen Sloan, Renee Lamanna, Nico Lisi, Leah Peebles, Melissa Hasley, Kimberly Raymer, Stephen Kocher, Bonnie Joseph, Immaculate Basil, Bobby Campbell, Kimberly Norwood, Alyssa Turney, Bobby Tennyson, Dale Kerstetter, Lacey Buenfil, Peggy McGuire, Jansen Brewer and Daniel Braden, Robert Cox, Lucas Degerness, Stephen Adams, Ashley Summers, Bonnie and Jeremy Degas, Judith Empke, Jessica Hamby, Tim Beauchart, Devin Bond, Juanita Nelson, Desiree Ferris, Angie Yarnell, Deborah Asbury, Sean Koski, Mary Lands, Devin Brown Busetta, Shanna Boydo, and Travis Murrow. Thank you. Like I said at the beginning, 2018 has really caused me to think about what Unfound will leave behind when sometime way down the road it isn't here. But I promise, and to kind of turn the phrase around, I will not leave these people behind. And that's the program. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.